I was just looking around for what could we do for topics, and Brooke contacted me and said, hey, I'm a native plant enthusiast. She has a degree in forestry, but then she got smaller in her focus. Is that a way of putting it?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to questions, we could probably ask about trees too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hi, my name is Brooke Warrington. That was a wonderful introduction. So I actually did this talk over in Franklin last year, which was really, really fun. Brika Lai, who is a conservation agent over there, started this little backyard ecosystem program. So I put something together, and then I customized it for tonight as well. So I always love giving this talk, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. So just a quick background about me. I've done a bunch of environmental stuff. So on the far left is me with a snorkel program with the Forest Service. It was the first 2 years that we had done it, and that's me in Vermont. I was in Virginia at the time, but I drove up to Vermont to teach kids how to snorkel in their local streams. Wow. This is me with the injured bird of prey, a little kestrel. I worked at a nature center, and then that's me with the Forest Service, and I was taking fish population samples. So, wow. Yeah, so I've had a lot of fun being in the environmental field. Done a lot of different things. Not representing any of these organizations today, but it was a lot of fun. So for the presentation outline, I'm going to provide some context to native plantings by exploring Massachusetts landscape history. So it's going to be kind of weird, but I promise it's all going to piece together. It's kind of an important component to talking about creating your own ecosystem in your backyard. Then I'm going to talk about some good stewardship practices and resources like forests and lakeside and river properties, some things that you can do. And then we're really going to dig in, no pun intended, into what you can do in your backyard. So how to choose your plants, what kind of wildlife you want to attract, and then I'm going to do a little highlight of some specific plants that you can look at. So for the New England landscape, there's two big major events that happened that really altered our landscape from pre-Columbian, pre-colonial times. There was sheep fever, and there was the 1938 hurricane, and both of these had really drastic impacts on our landscape. So sheep fever, and I'll have, I'm going to see if the YouTube video works, but I'm going to have Wessel talk about this in just a second. It was essentially an opportunity for people in the mid, like 1800s, to really invest in pastures because merino wool was so expensive at the time due to embargoes. And we're just going to watch Tom Wessel's talk a little bit because he's going to explain it better than me.
A stone wall like this one here is really iconic to central New England. And I define central New England as the northern and western half of Massachusetts, the bulk of Vermont, the bulk of New Hampshire, maybe excluding the very northern tier of those states, and the southwestern quarter of Maine. And all these walls date back to what's called the sheep fever period. The fever was a wool-growing mania that's been compared to a religious fanaticism because it was sort of the first market-scale farming opportunity in the region of central New England. Before that, everyone had self-reliant farms where they grew enough food to serve their families, but they weren't market farms. So there were three things that ushered in sheep fever. The first is Napoleon going to war against Spain in 1806, and it might sound odd that a war in Europe has big impacts here, but the Spanish had developed a special breed of sheep called the merino. And the merino not only made a very ample fleece, but it made wool that made woolen textiles that were not scratchy at all. So if you have any smart wool clothing products, they're made out of merino wool. Now, the Spanish were very smart because they liberally exported the wool around the world, but they had an embargo on the sheep itself. They didn't want anyone to get a hold of that breed and become a competitor. Well, it just happens in 1810, the ambassador to Portugal was a Vermonter named William Jarvis. And because of the war and the Spanish not being able to really keep their embargo in place, he was able to smuggle 4,000 sheep out of Spain through Portugal to be brought back to his farm in Wethersfield, Vermont. So now, as of 1810, we have merino sheep here in central New England. 2 years later, we went to war with Britain, and one result of the War of 1812 is that tariffs went up on all imported woolens, giving anyone who could make woolen textiles here a huge market advantage. And then 2 years after that, the power loom was invented, which allowed mass industrial production of textiles. And with the water power coming out of these central New England hills, it vaulted this region, become really one of the major woolen textile producing regions in the world. Now, to give you an idea how dramatic the landscape changes are that come with sheep fever, in 1810, when Jarvis brings over his first 4,000 merinos, only about 20% of the central New England landscape below 2,000 feet is open agricultural land. But in the next 35 years, as those 4,000 merino sheep swell to 6 million, the landscape becomes almost 80% deforested below 2,000 feet in this region, the bulk of it in pasturage for sheep. So over half the area of central New England was clear-cut to make way for sheep pasture. Now, many people think that these stone fences were built as soon as farms were opened up, and that's not the case. Farmers much preferred wooden fencing. They could put up 10 times as much split-rail zigzag wooden fencing a day as they could stone fencing. It's only with the massive deforestation associated with sheep fever, there's no longer enough wood to make wood fencing anymore. And so farmers, as those wood fences start to rot away, have to go back to stone dumps and bring back the stone to make these stone fences. In central New England, it's estimated we have over 125,000 miles of woodland stone fencing. That means if we lined it all up, it'd wrap the equator 5 times, it would stretch more than halfway to the moon. I've calculated if we piled all this stone, it'd be 6 times as massive as all the pyramids in Egypt.
So massive landscape changes happened during this sheep fever. And by 1840, there were 1.7 million sheep in Vermont, 600,000 in New Hampshire. Forest clearing peaked, as he said, in 1830 to 1885. So there was quite a bit of landscape changes that happened as a result of this. And you can actually see the forest cover also drastically changed. In the 1830s, forest cover went from 90% to 30%, which is a pretty marketable change. And forest composition also changed. So Harvard came out, I believe it's Harvard, came out with a really interesting study about what our forests looked like in pre-Columbian, pre-colonial times. And it's markedly different, which I'll show you in the next slide. But they were able to take town surveys and kind of calculate what those compositions looked like. And so maples increased tremendously in our modern landscape as a result. And things like the American chestnut decreased for different reasons because of the chestnut disease that ended up wiping out pretty much all of them. They're still trying to genetically find out a way to bring them back. But you can see there was a compositional shift in our forests. And you can see that definitely in this graph here. In our particular area, we had a lot more oaks, which is really interesting. And now we have a lot more maples. So just something to keep in mind. And so the economic competition also affected our soil quality. And in the 1860s, when cleared fields started to turn back into forests, at that time, the seed bank was probably a little different, and that's why we have a different forest composition. And then, of course, we get hit by the 1938 hurricane. The 1938 hurricane had 12 to 15 feet wave surges and a loss of about 600,000 acres of forest land, which is about 1,000 square miles of forest. So that had quite a bit of damage even after things started to recover. So why is all this important in the context of your backyard? The current landscape around us is not necessarily historic, or is not necessarily most beneficial to wildlife. Our landscapes looks very, very different from what it did before European settlement. And there's been major anthropogenic human influences and natural disasters that have shaped into what we know today. And we're constantly learning more about our natural world and adding to our ecological knowledge. So even pollen counts, people go and take these pollen cores out of lakes and they're able to discover exactly what was in the surrounding area. And all those kind of studies really help contribute to the changes that our landscape has seen over the years. And so we're going to dig a bit into our role to play in our own backyards. So woodlands, so some of us in Hudson have woodlands. I am not one of those people, but there are some really great programs out there for folks if they're interested. There's different stewardship programs. There's even a climate forestry program with TCR. Mass Audubon has an invasive plant guide, so if you want to rip out the bad stuff, there is plant guides. I might also be able to help with that as well. Conservation restrictions is a great way to ensure that, portions of your property that, especially if you have an invested emotional attachment to it, so that they preserve in perpetuity. And if you have larger tracts, or even if you have smaller tracts, you can always contact, figure out estate planning, easements, contact your local land trust and see if they might be interested. And then for streams, lakes, and rivers, there's different things we can do as well. So North American fish evolved in a forested environment. So trees and plants along the waterways have multiple benefits. This is actually what my forestry degree was on, the relationship between forests and our waterways. So food for benthic macroinvertebrates, so those are like the little mayfly critters that you see in the river. The leaves and the wood that are coming from the trees actually feed a lot of those guys. And then there's kind of cascading effects with that. Dragonflies are kind of like one of the top ones of the food chain, and there's predation among them, but it creates its own little ecosystem that also feeds the fish. And shade for temperature regulation is really important. There's massive differences in temperature if there's not shade for aquatic wildlife. And then habitat, like roots, these ball roots that are kind of in there really help fish kind of hide from predators, which helps with survival rates. And also sedimentation is prevented. So we're able to keep sedimentation out of the waterways. And why is that important? Well, sedimentation has lots of bad impacts that plants can resolve. So aquatic respiration is just as simple as the dirt getting into their gills. We don't want that to happen. Sometimes they're able to cough it out, but not a lot of times, so it's good to just keep it out. Dissolved oxygen levels, sedimentation also influences. Alteration to benthic environments. So there's actually some type of fish that create little nests with rocks. And when you cover all those rocks with silt, their eggs get smothered or they're not able to build those little nests. So preserving what's on the floor of those streams is really important. And ecological characteristics, so all those little critters that all rely on each other, like I mentioned. I always compare it to a Jenga tower. You pull out too many pieces, it comes falling down, so you want to make sure all the pieces that you can save are there. And so here's some kind of pretty examples. This is actually right near downtown, right near the landing near me. Lots of forest, lots of trees along that waterway. And then this is a really great example. There's actually a really cool document that really helps people that are on lakeside and on streamside who really like the view, but they can also still do things to preserve that view, which is really great. And so the guide is a guide to healthy lakes using lakeshore landscaping by Judy Davis. And she offers a lot of alternatives because I totally understand you love looking at the water. Like that's very understandable, probably why a lot of people move there. So you might not want enormous trees to go along there, but there's certainly other things you can do. You can really have a beautiful landscape garden that attracts butterflies and also helps retain the soil and keeps your lakeside or your streamside healthy. And then in our own yards, there's lots of things we can do, even if we aren't near a resource like forests and lakes. And before I get into that, let's talk a tiny bit about lawns. So let's see, I have some statistics. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Residential lawns make up 2% of U.S. land, which is about 49,000 square miles, which is equal to the size of Greece, like if to put that in perspective. But they require more irrigation than any agricultural crop in the country. So.
Not to mention chemicals.
Yes, that too, a lot of times that too. And the fascination kind of came from, these kind of regal, kind of old world lawns. It was kind of like the more you can maintain a lawn, the richer you were. And people were just kind of like, I want that. I think that's kind of cool. So it was kind of a societal pressure in some sense. And people did it, and people still do it. But there are alternatives. There's different ways that we can still have a tidy, neat-looking lawn if that's something that you're interested in, while also providing ecological value. And so I wanted to show this house because we'll come back to it. We're going to try to make it look all pretty with native plants with the power of Photoshop. So I'll be coming back to that in a bit. So this is actually a YouTuber that I really enjoy. He's a little unorthodox, I will say that much, so depends on your taste. But he is very much into rewilding public spaces and public and in your own yard as well. So he's a little bit more on the side of completely rewilding, but you can find a happy medium depending on what you want to do. Totally, you can rewild it if you want, but if you're interested, I really learned a lot from him and he kind of inspired me to get more into plants.
Do you know where he's located?
He is located currently in Texas. Yeah, but he does hop around. He's originally from Chicago, I think.
There's his, can you see that? Outsideonline.com.
Oh yeah, so that's a news article that came from him, and his YouTube name is Crime Pays, but Botany Doesn't, which is kind of a cheeky YouTube title. So this is kind of his ideal situation, right? Like having a front yard that's just a complete meadow, but totally understand if that's not everyone's cup of tea, because especially if you have kids kicking around a soccer ball, it's going to attract honeybees and things like that. So you might want to control it more, but you might not. Maybe you do have a space where you can just completely rewild. But there's also, kind of a compromise between the two. So this is one resource that I have where it kind of shows different things you can do in your yard in the before and after. So you can create like a strip, you can create like a small pollinator garden right here. You can put a rain barrel to help conserve things. You can put size appropriate trees to shade your house to help with your energy costs. There's lots of different options you can do, and it also helps catch sediment. Maybe there's like a wetter area and you can put a rain garden, that's what that is right there. And then of course, you can have your own little garden, which also helps with composting and things like that. And that's what I do at home. I have some of those rotator composts. And so with my own yard, this sign is fantastic for if it starts to look a little messy at certain times of year. People know what you're doing, which is great. Because I do have a little tiny section in the front of my yard that I do try to have seasonal flowers that pop up at different times of year. But there are times where it starts to die, looks a little interesting. But having that sign indicates what we're doing, which is really nice. So the good stuff in my yard, we're not going for being perfect. The good stuff in my yard is that there's 3 pollinator gardens. I have a problem, but I have somehow fits 56 trees on my 4th acre plot, which, yeah, is interesting, but they're all size appropriate, so hopefully they'll be in longevity. I've also manicured and mulched some areas, and I have a native grass lawn. I can't take credit for that. Whoever lived there the time before or the time before that actually put a really nice native grass that just kind of clumps over, doesn't get too long, and I have gotten to enjoy it and partially take credit for it. The not so good stuff. I do have a giant Norway maple in my front yard, and that is invasive. And I do go. There is in Danforth, we actually go and pull out invasive Norway maple saplings. I'm calling myself out. It's there, but it is a shade tree. I see kids like waiting for the bus under the tree. It shades the park across the street. If it was dead or dying, I would definitely replace it. Because it's a shade tree, I keep it. But again, I'm not perfect, and that's okay, and nobody has to be perfect. I have hosta. I have some Rosa Sharon that my husband hates that we're slowly phasing out because there's little suckers go everywhere. But it's all okay because you don't have to be perfect. Trial and error is part of the process, and every little bit of effort that you do really, really counts towards the end goal. All right, we're back to this house. We're going to try to figure out how to make this a nice little native plant oasis. So I'm going to tell you guys about a native plant list that is currently on the Town of Hudson website, on the Conservation Commission website. This is a little something that I put together because we had a lot of residents that were really interested in how to landscape with native plants. And so that resource is online for you guys. It talks about erosion control spotlight is what I try to do there. Some of my personal favorites I put in there, and I tried to put a big range of different trees and shrubs that you can also put in. And so just to go through the key very quickly, the symbols used to indicate all these different plant preferences, plant attributes, and benefits. So I put sunny, shade, dry, moist, wet. You kind of figure out what the soil is, what kind of light you're getting. I also put the flower bloom, like what color are the flowers? When do they bloom? Having those kind of things really helps make sure that not everything just blooms in June. You can actually plant stuff so at all different times of year you have something blooming. And also whether or not they're perennial. I love perennial plants because you just plug them in and they reproduce and you don't have to worry about them. It's awesome.
What does that say, leaves?
Oh, and leaves and fronds. So fronds are actually what the leaf part of the ferns are called. So I put both of them in there if they have that. And then benefits, I put all sorts of benefits. Somebody pointed out last time, why on earth do you have flies there? But you know, flies come in an array of shapes and sizes and attributes, so it's not just the ones that, you know, annoyingly get into your fruit basket. You know, they are the little tiny ones that are this nice electric green. You get all different kinds, and so they all have their importance with pollination. And I also included small mammals, large mammals, and wildlife habitat. So these are all some of the benefits that you can easily identify in this guide that I put online. All right, so we're going to talk about one of my favorite plants, and that's milkweed. And so in the back, I actually have free milkweed seeds in the little canister back there. So feel free to grab as many as you'd like on your way out. I collected them from my own yard. And there's lots of different types of milkweeds. The one I have back there is the common milkweed, but the butterfly milkweed is great too. Oh yes, do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, are they toxic to cats and dogs?
That is a great question. I know that they are not healthy for livestock. I would probably Google search to double check if they're okay for dogs and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Because they do have a latex inside of it, so that is a very good question. Yeah, so I would encourage you with the native plant list. I do have a caveat at the bottom. Always make sure, you know, double check and see and make sure that they're okay for your pets as well. Always important. I have 2 cats, so.
Can you just read the website? It's hard to read.
Oh, sure. So this one is, the website that I have here is gobotany.nativeplanttrust.org. And so that's where I get a lot of my information on very specifics. They really go county by county and let you know what's native in the area. And so that's how I kind of formulated the native plant list that I put together. It's really helpful.
If I might interrupt.
Yeah, sure.
If you sign in, which I don't know if we have a sign-in sheet, if you're on our mailing list, you don't need to sign in, but if you're new, and welcome if you are new, just please talk to Brian and he'll put you on our mailing list. How about that, Brian? And so you'll get, I think they come out with the newsletter, a recording of this and the slides.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so you don't have to wildly take notes. I should have said that at the beginning.
Oh, that's okay.
And on our website, greenhudson.org, all of our climate cafes, which we've had for almost 2 years, are recorded with the slides. So there's lots of interesting stuff in there.
Awesome.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yep, and I did put a lot of hyperlinks in the PowerPoint, so hopefully you guys can be able to navigate pretty easy through it. Yeah, so many different types of milkweed, which is really great. And milkweed really helps monarch butterflies, so it's a host plant. And so as I started digging more into native plants outside of trees, one of the interesting things I learned about was host plants. And what a host plant is that it is literally the plant, often very specifically, that allows certain insects to reproduce. And if that host plant isn't there, then they don't reproduce. And so a lot of these, I really try in my own garden to identify different host plants. You know, even when I worked at the Nature Center in Maryland, there's a skipper, like this tiny little butterfly, very specific plant in a very specific environment. That's the only way it can reproduce. So planting host plants like milkweed can really help. And especially with monarchs, because they have a really big migration schedule. Butterfly weed is something I have in my front yard. They stay pretty tiny. They only get about 2 feet tall. They're really gorgeous orange that blooms in July. And they're rare and protected, but a native plant trust at their garden in the woods, you can buy them. And that's where I've gotten them. And they reproduce and they create little guys and kind of fill in the areas that you have, which is really great. And then they're also used traditionally as well by indigenous peoples. And then the common milkweed is what I have seeds in the back there. The milkweed, especially this one, they do require cold stratification. So I have on the back of the seed packets, you gotta stick them in the fridge for a little bit before you actually put them into the ground. But you know, we also, right before the snow starts coming in, we do try to kick them into the soil, and that works as well. But yeah, they're extremely resilient, almost to the point of like, you might have to weed a little bit if you want to kind of control them a little bit. And then swamp milkweed is fantastic in wet spots. I have a couple right on the downspout of my gutters, and they're doing fantastic, which is really awesome. And we do get a lot of pollinators on those ones too. And it is the preferred milkweed for the monarch as well. And what we do is that actually these little filaments right here, I believe it was World War II, they actually had folks collecting these and taking the filaments and putting them into flotation devices, which was really amazing. And they're very light and feathery, and that's how they spread. They just kind of float away. But of course, we harvest them and kind of pass them out to people. And so you can see there's quite a long range that these monarchs travel in multiple generations. And so that's why having milkweed available for them to reproduce is so crucial. And they were recently listed in Massachusetts as endangered.
Really?
Yes, yeah, very recently. So this is a picture of a very dense suburban area, right? And to us, it's, looks like kind of a dead zone. But, all things considered, if just maybe 1 out of 8 residents planted a milkweed plant, now the landscape looks really different to a butterfly, especially on their reproductive journey. So I like showing this because not all is hopeless. Even just having 1 or 2 plants in your yards really makes a big difference. All right, so native bees. So there are actually 350 native bees in New England. There's a lot of different kind of bees. Ground nesting bees is something that I have in my yard. It is kind of wild to walk through. It's in my front yard, and they're swarming everywhere, but you walk through and they don't bother you. Yellow jackets, completely different. They are carnivores. They do pollinate a little bit, but they are aggressive. I have gotten stung plenty of times by them. But a lot of these other bees usually just kind of mind their own business. Like this bumblebee is on a bee balm. They love bee balms. I have a bee balm in my front yard and there's like 15 bees on it at any time. It's absolutely wild. And so where do they like to hibernate is what sometimes I get asked. And honestly, it doesn't look really nice where they like to hibernate. It's the inside of the bark of the dead trees or like a ball patch, which is what my yard is. That's where the little ground bees like to go. But if you don't have these kind of features, that's totally okay. They actually make these little bee houses that are very cool. So they're very fun. So they just have all different kinds of sticks, all the different kinds of holes and stuff that they're able to go and hibernate in. There is some maintenance required. You want to make sure that mold doesn't get into it, so they kind of recommend doing some maintenance once a year. But they will overnight, or they'll overwinter in it. And then another shout out I wanted to have was with asters. So these asters, they're beautiful. A lot of them bloom in the late fall. I really try to have all different seasons. And in the late fall is really when a lot of these pollinators will try to come in and try to get some last minute nectar before they hibernate. So New England aster is one of my favorite. It's very tall. It's like 3 feet to 7 feet. But it is a late bloomer, and it's a host plant to the pearl crescent butterfly. The birds eat and the small mammals eat the seeds. And then this is actually a picture. This is like right by the road on Guyson, and they just swarm my asters. They're just all over the place. Those are all honeybees, bumblebees. And it started from 2 plants that I actually got from Alexi and Emily.
No
yeah,
kidding.
so yeah, they got some good stock for sure. And I'll tell you guys about them in a bit too. And then whitewood asters, you find these in more shaded areas. This is actually at the Bolton Conservation Land, and they seem a little smaller. But you can see they also have little bumblebees just kind of floating around, getting some last minute nectar before it gets too cold outside.
So do bumblebees sting?
Only if you step on them, yeah. The only time I've heard of it is when they step on them, yeah. Fortunately, my sister did when she was little, but yeah, no, they're pretty gentle.
My brother pets them.
Yes, I actually had one when I was a lifeguard hanging out on my Gatorade bottle, and he was my buddy for the day until he decided to fly away. The woodland sunflower, I will say, this actually sells out really quickly at Native Plant Trust. I've been trying to get it for 2 years, so if you like this, try to put a pre-order in February with them. Because
Somebody asked me before we started about sunflower, are there any non-invasive sunflowers?
Yes.
And I said yes, and now I know
Yes,
it's
yeah.
true.
The
It's
woodland
true.
sunflower. Yeah, it's beautiful and it blooms late summer. And I currently got my eye set on it. I got the right spot for it. So fingers crossed I get it this year. And then this is actually what I have in my yard. Is the Pennsylvania sedge. And so it only needs to be mowed twice a year. Honestly, my husband and I do it less than that. It stays so short. The 6 to 12 inches does not mean height. it means it gets here and then it flops over. So the only downside to this is like it does form clumps. So, you know, if you've got kids running around like playing soccer, probably not conducive, honestly. But for us, it's just kind of, you know, we walk around in it and it's totally fine. And yeah, we mow it maybe once a year and you can't even tell. It's kind of wild. And then purple love grass is something else I have. It's a host plant to a skipper. The colors change throughout the season. It is a little short-lived, but it tolerates really poor soils. And yeah.
Write that one down.
Yeah, they're very hardy. I really like them. And all these guys are also in the native plant list. All these guys that I'm showing you. I guess I forgot to mention that, but.
What's a Zabulon skipper? I know you keep saying
Yeah.
skipper, but I don't know what it is.
Oh, a skipper. It's kind of like a mini butterfly.
Oh.
Yeah, it's in the family's Lepidoptera, I think. And so I actually don't know what distinguishes them from the monarchs, to be honest. But they're akin to each other. Yeah, they're like a little mini butterfly.
What did you mean by short-lived on that grass?
Yes, so I think it's only lives to be about 3 years and then it dies. Yeah, so that's the negative part of it. You know, you can let the seeds just kind of drop and germinate, but yeah, they don't last super long though. And then for leaves, believe it or not, having leaves in your yard can be a very good thing. There's the woolly caterpillar and the lunar moth and the this one is the swallowtail. Yes, thank you. Stick bugs and bumblebees. All these guys will actually hibernate and overwinter in leaves. They're pretty incredible. Let's see. So Luna moths and swallowtail butterflies disguise their cocoons in chrysalises as dried leaves, blending in with the real leaves. And actually, the stick bugs will go up in the canopy and they'll actually drop their eggs into the leaves. So leaves are really an important part of the reproductive cycle for a lot of these insects. So something I do because, you know, on one hand, I am in a densely populated area. I don't want my leaves to blow in my neighbor's yard, you know, because that kind of stinks for them. But what I do is that I do move the leaves into my backyard where I do have my garden. And that's kind of the happy medium that I've come up with. But it's totally legitimate to also leave your leaves. And if people aren't sure about it, they do make signs. So, you know, if people aren't sure why you're leaving leaves in your yard, you can say, I promise it's not that. I don't have a leaf blower or a rake. I'm doing this for a purpose. And the signs are good.
Where do you get that and the other sign that you had?
Oh, yes. So the other sign that I had, I have a link next to it in the beginning.
Great.
Yeah. But also the Xerces Society for joining them also has this as like a little reward. But the artist, is really great. And I have him earlier in the presentation, a hyperlink.
And Deborah's in West Newton has a bunch of signs also.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, like your pollinator sign that you had, they've got that there.
Oh,
and
that's so
other
cool.
things like that.
Oh, super cool.
That is great.
Yeah, the signs go really far. I've had neighbors ask me about them, and they're like, I wasn't sure what you were doing, and then I saw the butterfly, and then I saw your pollinator sign, and now I get it, which is really nice. Shrubs, we've also got some really great shrubs. Inkberry is one of my favorite. It's an evergreen shrub, so it really helps with privacy, and it doesn't get super tall. It can get 6 feet, but you can trim it. And the berries, the birds just absolutely love it. So I have it kind of near the intersection that I'm at to help with privacy, but not get so obnoxiously tall that people can't see around the corner. And then winterberry, also a huge favorite. This is deciduous, so it will drop its leaves, but it has this beautiful winterberry that's a bright red, and yeah, the birds absolutely love it. The little robin that has come into our yard just really eats it all up, and it's a host plant to 34 species of butterflies and moths. Yeah, so it's a really good powerhouse shrub. And then white oak is one of my favorites. It's host to 600 plus different caterpillar species. And it is the preferred food source. So, you know, red oak, their acorn's a little bit more bitter to critters, but the white oak is a little bit more palatable, and so it's actually the preferred acorn for a lot of bird species. And then the American hawthorn beam is what I have in my front yard. Actually pretty close to my house. The tallest it's going to get is 40 feet, which is still kind of tall, but it is super resilient. A lot of people use it as street trees. It's also a host plant. You know, it just has these tiny little nutlets essentially, and so it's not like you're having huge walnuts falling on your car or anything like that. So it's a good medium-sized tree. And the service berry is also one that I really like. It stays small, 15 to 30 feet. You do have to, sometimes you can get single stem or you can get multi-stem, but it has this beautiful white flower in the spring, and it is absolutely fantastic for wildlife, and actually humans can eat it as well, the berries, which is kind of neat. And yeah, it can be trained, but typically it is multi-stem, and so you do have to be careful a little suckering because they kind of like to spread that way. But I have one next to my house, and yeah, it's not going to get too tall. It's going to be great to have birds right outside my window. All right, and so where to purchase native plants? And so I have some hyperlinks. So February is really exciting to talk about this because right now I was just told that about a week ago the Native Plant Trust Garden in the Woods is having their pollinator kits currently for sale. So if you're not quite sure what to plant, they come with these little plug, I believe they're plug kits, and you can go around, and if you have an area that you want to put into a pollinator garden, it's kind of like a smorgasbord of all different kinds of pollinator plants. And then for the nursery garden in the woods, which is the one in Framingham, they also have one further out west, but this is the nursery that's open to the public. They do take pre-sales, pre-orders. So I also put this in here as a reminder for me to email them about that sunflower I've been eyeing for a very, very long time. Because once the nursery opens, it's kind of when it come and go. Like you can call them to see when it comes in. But if you really, really want a specific plant, it's good to contact them now. And then the pollinator kits are great too. Blue Stem Natives is over in Norwell, Massachusetts. I wanted to give them a shout out as well. It's a woman-owned business that's out there, and they're very awesome. I've contacted them before, and they have a lot of really great stuff. Ecotypes too, just like Native Plant Trust is. And ecotype is basically, it's directly seeded from the surrounding area, so nothing's coming from different states or anything. And then the spring plant sale, and so Alexi and Emily Wilder, they have a plant sale in Hudson over near Lake Boone. It kind of depends on where their saplings or where their plants are at any given time. But definitely keep an eye out because they'll always put out signs fairly early. And
He was our first. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go for it. Yeah.
Alexi was our first speaker for the climate cafes, and so what would that be? The fall of 2023. You could go online, and he has it's very interesting. It's a very different presentation, but he's around the corner from me, and that's where they have the sale. So,
Do they propagate their plants?
Yes.
This is not a community bring your plants to donate.
no,
That's
they
not-
sell them,
That's very good.
and
Yeah.
there are millions. And if they're not there, it's a self-service thing.
Yeah.
So, and they
They do
just
it
had a
twice a
baby,
year.
so I don't know. What'd you say?
Twice a year,
Yeah, twice a year. There's one in the fall.
Yeah.
spring and fall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spring and fall.
And
Yeah.
they put big signs out on, excuse me, right by Rock Avenue, where the Lake Boone Ice place is
okay.
on Main Street. So you'll find them if you look for them.
Yes.
And I could also send out something in the,
Yeah, we should do that.
should I?
Yeah, I hope it'd be
It's a big
blended.
responsibility.
I would love to be blended.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put it in the newsletter, although, as I was trying to say, they just have a newborn. So I don't know how organized they're gonna be.
They're not.
They're not. So we'll see. I'll let you know what I know.
Yeah. And then a lot of my plants, they either came from them or they came from Native Plant Trust. But yeah, the starter kit that I got from them, fantastic.
Really?
Like, oh my gosh, it's wonderful. All right, so now we're gonna look at our house to wrap this up. With all these native plants, what can we get this to look like? Well, here's one thing we can do between the two. So we got some New England asters, we've got some butterfly weed, we've got some inkberries. So just that little bit, it really can make a huge difference.
And you put a rain barrel.
And I did. I put a rain barrel over in the corner there. Yes.
What's the yellow one?
Oh, goldenrod. Yes. Yep. Goldenrod.
Yeah, I got this gigantic goldenrod plant from Alexi, and I had a big hole that my dog had dug, and he came over and plopped it right in there. And then I thought, oh great, now everyone who's allergic
I
is.
was gonna say, I thought it was an allergen.
It isn't. He said that it grows with something else that is the allergen.
Yes.
Ragweed, is it?
Ragweed,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He said this is not.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
You confirm that?
I do. I confirm that, yes, because I am very allergic to ragweed, and I had the same misunderstanding as well. And then looked more into it, made the leap, planted goldenrod in my yard, and I've been totally fine. So it is very true. All right, and that's about it. I wanted to leave time for discussion and questions and all sorts of things, but definitely feel free to email me if you also have additional questions later too. So, yeah.
Can you go back to the house before you put everything in?
Sure.
So are we looking at clover here or just weeds?
I wondered the same thing.
Huh?
I think it's weeds.
Weeds.
Yeah, but I wondered the same thing when I first saw it because it does look a little clovery. Yeah.
I don't mind it, weeds.
No, I think it looks nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this one's, I have a bias. This one's the Pennsylvania sedge
I like that.
that I put in there.
Oh,
Yeah.
the Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the one that's in my yard,
So
yeah.
can you point to the different ones just for us beginners?
Sure, yeah. So these are little butterfly weeds right here. Then a rain barrel I decided to put in. New England aster, so those are those tall ones that my honeybees loved. This is common milkweed, it looks a little bit taller and scragglier. And then this is goldenrod. And then these are inkberries, so those will have that evergreen effect. Rhododendron will, a couple of them will actually have an evergreen effect as well. Some of them are deciduous, so they'll drop their leaves, but you can get rhododendron that's also keeps its leaves.
That little tree?
And the little tree is my little imitation of a hop-horn beam. It's fairly close to what it might look like, yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
When is a good time to plant, like the milkweed, the goldenrod? Would it be the next couple of months or?
Right, so the milkweed, if you have seeds, you have to do cold stratification. So you put it in the fridge for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then when the ground starts to thaw and you can get like about a 1/4 an inch under the soil, that's when you would plant it. And it's totally okay if there's still like a little fluctuation with the cold, like that should be okay. But that's around the time that you want to do it. Personally, if you're getting plugs or actually the plants to plant them in, I tend to wait until April, May for myself. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
What about clover as a lawn alternative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So clover is interesting. It's not bad. The thing I would caution against is that a lot of people have started to do non-flowering clover, and so it's you're still getting the soil retention with preventing sedimentation, stuff like that, but you're not really getting the ecological benefit of having those flowers. But yeah, nothing really wrong with flowering native clover, to be honest. That's totally fine. But there are these kind of hybrids or industrialized ones that don't have flowers. So yeah.
Why would someone do a non-flowering clover?
Yeah, so the reasoning that they have with that is it's the fear of getting stung, I guess I should put it that way. So it's the bumblebees in the grass, if you step on a bumblebee, they will sting you. So I think it's more so of especially if you have kids running around a pool, right? And you want an alternative to to grass, but you don't want the bees going near the flowers because you got barefoot kids. That's usually why people go that route, honestly. Yeah.
When you put in trees, what size of trees were you buying and planting to put in?
Yeah, the size that I purchased them in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the size, we just kind of depended on what we could fit in the RAV4. It was kind of what we ended up doing. Sometimes they were smaller than that, though. Sometimes we could fit them in a smaller vehicle, but that was kind of the limiting factor behind it. I've also purchased some plants from Bigelow. They're kind of near here too. They do some native seed sourcing. You have to talk to them about it to figure out which ones. But yeah, I've gotten 3 to 4 feet tall usually. And they do really well. Yeah, you just kind of dig them in, rough the surrounding area of their roots, and they tend to take.
What's your opinion of butterfly bush?
Butterfly bush. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's the interesting thing with, these seed mixes that say that they're pollinator friendly and stuff like that. They're not always native. Personally, I stay away from butterfly bush just because, the milkweed and stuff kind of provides a really nice alternative. But I guess it's just, you know, it kind of depends on what people want to do in the yard, but you always have to make sure of like what's invasive, what might be invasive. You know, like roses of Sharon are not listed as invasive in Massachusetts, but they're going all over our yards and stuff.
You can keep trimming back. I mean, every spring, I moved into a house that happened to have it in the yard.
Yes, yeah.
And I would cut them way back. And
Right.
They just stayed very contained, and it was the most attractive thing to butterflies.
Yes, no, butterflies absolutely love it. So yeah, no, that's very true. Yeah, so it still provides nectar to pollinators. You know, it still gives them nectar and stuff. I think it's like, yeah, the propagation in the seeds is what I like to look out for. So keeping track of, you know, especially with our zoning, you know, changing slowly up north, you know, trying to make sure that they don't are at risk of really taking to like woods and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, so they're invasive in some ways?
Butterfly weed, I have to look a little bit more into to specify that, but yeah, there are some plants that are like slowly getting a little bit more and more aggressive out in the wild. So yeah, it's always something to look out for.
Do you have any comments on Japanese knotweed?
Oh yes, it's delicious when they infuse it with Hudson Hive honey. I have had that.
I have that in my kitchen.
Yes, I do too. But yeah, Japanese knotweed, it is rough. It tries to go into areas that are really erosion prone, but it just takes over. So yeah, and like really the only way to kill it is through herbicide from what I've seen, because their roots go down like 8 feet, I think, like that.
Pollinators seem to love it.
Pollinators? Yeah, I know.
It lingers into the fall. It gives them that last
It
food.
does. And so something with, in Danforth we noticed too was, you know, Japanese barberry has early spring flowers. So it's kind of like the opposite, right? And it's kind of like, you know, you have to stay ahead of it because you don't want to take away pollinator resources too quickly.
No.
And so that, but also like you want to, that's why the native planting really comes important. It's like putting that understory that provides like the asters with the late fall pollination, or the you know, the serviceberry with that early spring pollination. Basically those invasive plants are taking over those niches that are currently existing in the native world. So yeah, so it's interesting. So we should take them out. We should put something else back in as an alternative. Yeah.
Are yellow jackets pollinators?
They are. They go after my honey bush, my holly bush. They do pollinate, but they're also kind of nasty, especially in the fall. They do eat. I've seen them eat caterpillars and stuff like that. So, and there are native yellow jackets and invasive yellow jackets. So the yellow jackets that I encountered when I first moved into Hudson were living in our bedroom wall, and those are not native. Those are German yellow jackets. And you know, so we weren't sure if it was an electrical problem. It just ended up being a huge hive in our wall. So as much as they might pollinate, they were invasive being in the structures like that, and we had to get rid of them. But there is a balance in the ecosystem because skunks eat yellow jackets. So if there are yellow jackets in the woods, you know, skunks will just dig up and eat them all. So they do have a place in the ecosystem, but because they're so aggressive, you know, sometimes it can get a little out of control, and you know, they are especially ornery in the fall for sure. So
Well, they love the sugar from the soda cans at the transfer station.
oh yes.
Every fall, it's us in the yellow jacket.
Well, you know what's funny with that? So with honeybees, with the honeybees, like they'll actually kill off the drones before winter, and I feel like. I don't know, have scientific papers with this, but yellow jackets will kind of get attracted to that sugary smell of like the honey, because in the fall they know like, oh, it's, you know, there's going to be a bunch of dead drones that I can eat, and I think they confuse soda with that, honestly. So yeah, so I think Pepsi's a beehive.
But they do wreck picnics.
Yeah. I had one steal a piece of my hamburger one time. They're wild. Yeah.
A big piece?
It was a flight-sized piece, yeah, little chunk.
Brooke, what about things like blueberry bush? Is there some good blueberries?
Oh yeah, high bush blueberry, low bush blueberry, those are wonderful. Yeah, and they're really great. They're edible, you know, for us, but also for critters too, yeah, they're awesome.
I'm thinking about ticks. So if our lawn is a little bit longer, is that a problem that way? I mean, I don't think there are ticks. I don't think there are deer ticks in our landscape, in my landscape. I'm just talking about my landscape, okay? But there have been, I think we've gotten some dog ticks or whatever they're called. So, yeah, so can you speak to the tick problem?
Yeah, I've seen ticks on branches too. Yeah, the way they attach is that they kind of like stand at the edge of like a twig or whatever, and they actually reach their little arms out, and they wait for somebody to come by to grab onto you. Yeah, I've never had that issue in my yard, which is interesting. But I do understand that with a meadow, yeah, it would. I mean, there would be a greater risk with extremely long stalks, to be honest. Yeah, the way that I can perceive it is like, you know, creating a mini ecology, like, you know, there'll be different things that eat it, but, you know, I would say that super long grass in high trafficked areas probably wouldn't do because of the ticks, yeah.
All right.
So great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.